1973. The world was about to face a shock it never saw coming. Everything seemed normal. People drove their cars to work, factories hummed, cities bustled. But then, without warning, life came to a halt. A sudden blow that would affect everyone: oil. That year, the world took an unexpected turn. But let's dive in and see how the 1973 oil crisis unfolded. A crisis that changed the global economy forever. As you can see in this graph, oil prices began to climb drastically starting in 1973, following the OPEC oil embargo. This sharp increase caused global oil prices to quadruple, disrupting economies worldwide. The price surge had far-reaching consequences, raising the cost of everything from transportation to goods production. In October of 1973, war broke out in the Middle East. The Yom Kippur War saw a conflict between Israel and several Arab nations. This war would not only affect the region, but also set off a chain reaction that would impact the global economy. As the war escalated, the oil-producing nations of OPEC made a strategic decision that would change everything. OPEC countries, in protest of the Western nations' support for Israel, decided to restrict oil exports. But this embargo wasn't just aimed at the West, it affected the entire world. Suddenly, the price of oil quadrupled. The world felt the jolt. Gas stations had long lines. Cars were no longer being used for long drives, only for essential trips. People were talking on the streets. Can we even find oil? In a world suddenly turned upside down. From the United States to Europe, from Japan to Turkey, every nation felt the sting of rising oil prices. The energy crisis deepened, production slowed, and factories began to close. Inflation soared. People were paying more for everyday items, yet wages weren't keeping up. But the crisis didn't just stop with soaring prices. As oil prices spiked, a new economic phenomenon emerged: stagflation. High inflation coupled with stagnant economic growth. Prices kept rising, but economies began to stall. Unemployment surged, production dropped, and the global economy was in a standstill. This was devastating for industrial nations. At this time, people weren't just struggling to afford gas. They were also facing difficulties meeting basic needs. Nations began implementing energy-saving measures. Power cuts, reduced public transport, and streetlights turned off were just some of the drastic steps taken. Eventually, the oil embargo was lifted in 1974, but the world would never be the same. Oil had become a strategic commodity. Countries scrambled to diversify their energy sources and began heavily investing in alternative energy research. This crisis, along with others, reshaped the global economic landscape and had long-lasting effects on policies worldwide. The 1973 oil crisis wasn't just a spike in oil prices. It revealed the vulnerabilities of the global economy and demonstrated how quickly things could unravel. Oil had become a critical force that could impact the stability of entire nations. And in the aftermath of this, economies worked harder to prepare for potential future crises. Today, we might have moved past the 1973 oil crisis, but the lessons learned still echo. Oil can trigger a crisis, but sometimes big crises lead to even bigger changes. And that's the brief story of the 1973 oil crisis. This major event in economic history continues to be remembered as we continue to learn from its impact on the world.